Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 53rd day of the 108th Legislature, second session. Our chaplain for today is Reverend Richard Snow, Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod from Seward, a guest of Senator Brandt's. Please rise.
Good morning. We pray. Lord God, Heavenly Father, you've established the three estates and authorities here on earth of the home, the government, and the church. We appeal to you on their behalf this day. Visit, O Lord, the homes in which your people dwell and keep all harm and danger from them. Grant that we may dwell together in peace under the protection of your holy angels, sharing eternally in your blessings. Bless the homes of those gathered here today as they seek to serve and protect and bless the homes of those who dwell under their care. Almighty God, you've given us this good land and good government as our heritage. Grant that we remember your generosity and constantly seek and do your will. Bless our land with honest industry, truthful education, and an honorable way of life. Grant that we who came from many nations and many different languages may become a united people. Support us in our liberties and give these to whom we have entrusted the authority of government, the spirit of wisdom, that there may be justice and peace in our land. In times of prosperity, may our hearts be thankful, and in times of trouble, do not let our trust in you fail. Finally, merciful God, we humbly implore you to cast the bright beams of your light upon your church, that we, being instructed by your holy word, may walk in the light of your truth and be a beacon to your world. Lord God Almighty, even as you have gifted us with home, government, and church, you have blessed these your servants with various and unique gifts of the Holy Spirit. Continue to grant them the grace to use them to your honor and glory. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
I recognize Senator Sanders for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I call to order the 53rd day of the 108th Legislature, second session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Record, Mr. Clerk.
There is a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any corrections for the journal?
Have no corrections this morning.
Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
There are, Mr. President, communication from the governor. Engrossed legislative bills 1412, 1413 were received at his office on March 26 and signed on April 1, delivered to the Secretary of State on April 2. New resolutions, LR 453, 454, 455, and 456, all offered by Senator DeKay. Those will be laid over. In addition, LR 457 by Senator Meyer also will be laid over. That's all I have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Clemens announces some guests in the North Balcony, fourth graders from Conestoga Public Schools in Murray, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Lowe would like to recognize two guests under the South Balcony, Father Paul Colling and Father Tom Ludwig, both of the first of Kearney and the second from Missouri. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Dorn would like to recognize the physician of the day, Dr. Heather Kleeman. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign legislative resolutions 343 and 350. Mr. Clerk, items on the agenda.
Mr. President, the first item on today's agenda is Legislative Bill 388. The bill was introduced by Senator Linehan. It was considered on March 27th. At that time, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh had filed a motion to indefinitely postpone pursuant to Rule 6, Section 3.
Senator Linehan, you're recognized for a refresh on the bill.
And I have how much time for that? It's been 4 days.
1 minute.
Okay, good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Mr. President. So this is the governor's tax plan that front loads the 1107 credit. It increases, it's a shift. It provides almost 50% more funding for public schools. I will have charts that I will be passing out this morning. The one thing I didn't talk about last week that I will talk about today a lot, this isn't a vote. No matter how you vote on this, it's going to be a bad vote. That's just the political reality of it. Because what has happened in suburban and urban Nebraska in the last 2 years, your valuations have skyrocketed. Lancaster County, 23% up. What happens if we do nothing is your school aid's going down 23%. So you can vote for this and adjust it so property taxpayers across the states and cities and suburban Nebraska don't have a 20% tax increase, or you cannot. Because there is no, it's
That's your
the old,
time.
thank you.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. And Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized for a 1 minute refresh on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. My motion is to indefinitely postpone this bill and basically to take it off the board. And I disagree. I think there is a good vote on this. Voting red on LB 388 is something I am 100% comfortable doing because I don't want to bankrupt the state. So I think this is not the avenue that we should be pursuing. So please vote in favor of the indefinitely postpone.
Thank you, Senator Cavanaugh. Returning to the queue, Senator John Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Well, we're back on 388. I support the motion to indefinitely postpone, and I would like, I guess, to set the conversation a little bit. The front loading of 1107, the increase in foundation aid, those property tax portions are not in LB 388. The debate about LB 388 is about increasing sales taxes and taking away some exemptions. And it is the crux of the tax shift. It is about shifting increasing state revenue that could be used for those other things that are not in this bill on the backs of working people through an increase in sales tax. So we've had some conversations about this last week and I wanted to go back to the part about this that kind of, concerns me the most, which is this talk about how much relief people are going to get and the ignoring the fact of how this affects people who already claim 1107. So I was looking at this example, which is example number 6 from Senator, it looks like Bug on here, but it's Brad Von Gillern. And I made that joke last week, but I just can't get over it myself. Example number 6, which pertains to Omaha, I did the math. I'll do it for you again. So the property tax savings on this example, if you've lost it, it's a single family home of $300,000 with a AGI of $80,000. So this individual that we're saying is a property tax savings of $3,162. And so my issue with that is that property tax savings in this analysis is presuming this person is not claiming their 1107 credit. So I know we've had lots of different numbers about how much of 1107 is getting claimed, but I would just say there are people who claim 1107. And those folks need to understand that if you claim your 1107 credit, you are not getting $3,162 in property tax savings. So I did the math on this house under current OPS levy, which was $1.21702, which turns out to be $3,651 of this person's tax bill goes to OPS, which means their 1107 credit was $1,095.31. So if you subtract that from the overall tax savings, then you end up with, a lot less under this. So it's 3,162, and then there's, so they're listing here that a total property tax and utility savings of $1,473. So if you take out the $1,095, you end up with $379 in savings. And according to this analysis, these folks would be paying an additional sales tax of $409. So my read of this, if it's somebody who's currently claiming 1107, they are going to be paying more, $30 more a year in overall taxes, just in this analysis. And so I'd be happy for someone to tell me that that is incorrect, but I think we should be honest about this. Just saying that some percentage of people don't claim 1107, therefore front-loading 1107 is new property tax relief is not true. And so we have to look at the whole picture and how this affects all Nebraskans. There's a lot of other issues with this that people have hit on, how this affects renters. I'm sorry, 1 minute? Thank you, Mr. President. How this affects renters, how this tax shift is irrational, illogical, unfair, will disproportionately affect Nebraskans, and how it will take money from cities and move them to rural, which I know is, you look at the folks who are in favor of this and the folks who are opposed to it, you might be able to figure that out from context clues. But the most important thing to think about when you're talking about voting for cloture on this bill, talking about voting for this bill contains tax increases. This contains the sales tax increase. It does not contain property tax reduction. So if you vote for cloture on this, that is a vote in favor of the sales tax increase. So that's why I'm opposed to this. I'm opposed to the tax shift. I'm opposed to the tax increase. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I do also rise in favor of the motion to indefinitely postpone, as well as opposed to LB 388. I want to take a second to also sort of recenter around some of the conversations we had last week before I dive into some of the details here. I see the queue's already pretty full, so I think we're going to have a good opportunity today to have a conversation about what this does do and what this doesn't do. But I think it's important, again, to highlight and reiterate LB 388, again, does not contain in it the front loading of the 1107 credit, nor does it have anything to do with the education funding insofar as how that 1107 is actually going to go into that, or the increased foundation aid. My understanding is that all comes from an education bill that may or may not be exec on today or kicked out of committee. We don't know yet. And so when you are looking at voting for LB 388, I want to remind you two things. A, exactly that it does not have in it the actual front loading of the 1107. It contains in it a myriad of things, if the committee amendment's up, that primarily is an increase in sales tax and the elimination of sales and use tax exemptions on certain industries. In addition to that, it does contain some modifications of the soft cap that was passed last year with regard to school districts, and it does also include, as I understand it, a hard cap on political cities and counties, political subdivisions, that is different than what those individuals had originally negotiated. And so, colleagues, I also want to say, number two, if you vote for cloture on LB 388, you are voting for a sales tax increase. I know some people have had a conversation about whether they want to vote for cloture but not vote for the bill. If you permit LB 388 in its current form with the committee amendment to move forward, if you give that bill cloture, that is a vote saying that you are fine with the bill proceeding as is, which increases taxes. And so I just want to make sure my colleagues fully understand that when we're actually finally getting to the vote sometime down the road here today after the next 4 hours of debate. Over the long weekend, a number of my friends and family reached out to me asking kind of what's going on with this bill. And I will tell you that across the board, what a lot of people expressed to me was frustration. They expressed to me frustration over the fact that this felt like it was a property tax plan that was on the backs of everyday people. And a lot of my friends in particular who are renters said that they frankly thought this conversation was out of touch. We oftentimes kind of go down a rabbit hole here about whether or not property tax benefits renters or not. I'm sure we can continue to have that conversation, but the vast majority of my friends who don't work in this field or live in this body still rent their properties. And these are married folks with kids, full-time jobs, but they rent because they simply don't have the upfront ability to put a down payment down in a house or what have you. And a number of people in my generation have had difficulty purchasing homes. And so they have found that this entire conversation about this tax shift to be somewhat problematic, given the fact that they just simply feel it's not ultimately going to benefit them or the people in their family. When we're talking about raising the sales tax, that's a sales tax increase that affects everyone in the state. When we talk about some of these property tax reductions, again, it's unclear to me whether or not there's going to be a massive benefit to everybody or just a select few. I want to be also very clear. I am completely in favor of front-loading the 1107 tax credit, as I believe that will create a more equitable distribution of property tax relief. But I also believe that if you currently claim your 1107 credit, it's ultimately potentially going to be a wash. And so what we're going to see with the front loading of the 1107 is people who are currently not claiming that credit see their property taxes go down, and everybody is going to see the numbers go down on the amount of money they actually pay. In addition to that,
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Having the 1107 credit front loaded, it's going to help create better cash flow for those who have lower or less money, because you don't have to wait till the end of the year to claim that tax credit and get it back in your pocket. So I do think the 1107 front loading has a true benefit to Nebraskans, and I've been in favor of that this entire time. What I cannot support, however, is funding that through an increase in taxes and a sales tax that's going to disproportionately affect lower and working and middle class people. I anticipate, again, we're going to keep talking about this. I don't know what's changed since last week. I don't know if there's been conversations that I certainly haven't been a part of any conversations of what's changed, but I hope we can come together and find a true answer to this, because we do need property tax relief, just not a tax shift that is an increase on taxes in Nebraskans. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. Senator Kavanaugh, John Kavanaugh, and Senator Dungan have been talking about the tax increase. Let me reiterate what I said last week. If you want to make this work, if you want to balance a three-legged stool, if you want to make our tax system equally by property, income, and sales tax, you have to make an adjustment greater than this. I suggested this last week. Let me do it again. Maybe some weren't listening. We currently collect sales tax on about $50 billion base, 50 billion. About 70 billion, little less than that, is exempt from sales tax. So if you want to make this work, what you have to do is broaden the base and lower the rate. Broaden the base, lower the rate. So if you took away another 50 billion in tax write-offs, exemptions, you have a $100 billion base instead of whatever we're trying to do here. It probably gets us to 55 billion. And you do the math. You do a $100 billion base, and we're currently at 5.5%. What's 5.5 divided by 2? 2.75? So you broaden the base, lower the rate to 3. You collect all the money you need to do what you're going to do about property tax relief, and you balance a three-legged stool if that is your goal. This is not fixing our broken tax system. And I had several calls this morning, people encouraging me to vote for 388, and that's kind of ironic because up until this point, since we started on this debate, I have not received one email, one phone call, or one comment from anybody saying support 388. And I had 3 calls this morning. That's the first 3 I've ever had in support of this. And they are saying we have to do this so we get property tax relief. And I'm telling you, this will be a decrease in your increase. Because if you're already collecting $1,107 credits, this will be about a 10% reduction greater than what you're currently getting. So it'll be a decrease in the increase. That's what we've done here since 1957. Our tax code is 1,271 pages until we pass this, or whatever else we pass this year, and that'll add to those pages. What that does, it picks winners and losers. And we've been really good at picking winners and losers. And those in authority, the Chamber of Commerce, DED, those in the legislature that have authority to get businesses to come here because of our tax incentives, like the power that they currently have. This doesn't solve your tax problem at all. Never once after this passes will you own your property. You continue to rent from the government. There's no freedom and liberty in this bill or any other bill that's ever been brought by the group that wants to lower property tax. The only way to do this is to eliminate the property tax and put the taxpayer in first place. This does not do that. So unless we get some kind of spending reduction or lid on what local units of government can spend, this does absolutely nothing. And so we're going to talk about this for 4 hours, and then we're going to vote. And Senator Linehan said this is a bad vote no matter how you vote. I understand that. But I can tell you right now that unless we stand up and talk about what the real solution is, and we're willing to address the real problem, we're never going to get a solution that works. And so when the revenue goes down, and I just talked to a farmer this morning, I asked him this question. I said,
1 minute.
Do you think your revenue is going to be less in 24, your income, than it was in 23? He said, oh, yes, yes. So when we get through the ARPA money, when the ARPA money quits flowing through our economy, then we're going to deal with the ag economy in the state. And when we do that and they have less money to pay the taxes that they had been paying to keep the state's revenue up, so at a point when you can't pay the taxes because you don't have the money, then they're going to raise the sales tax 1%. How does that make sense? That's an 18% increase. Reminds me when the NRD came into the local county board and asked to raise their levy from 4 to 5. And I told him that's 25% increase. He said, it's only a penny. I said, that's a 25% increase. And that's what we need to understand. This is 18%. Think about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Raybold, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, fellow Nebraskans out there watching us on TV. I am 100% in support of indefinitely postponing, and I do not support LB 388. And like Senator Erdman, I have not received one single email in support. I have received hundreds of concerned emails from families, from the businesses that will be some of the losers on the sales tax that we're implementing. Make no mistake, this is a tax increase. This is a tax increase and also a sleight of hand of cost shifting. And this is not new for our Nebraska legislature. I can tell you that LB 388 is so chock full of unintended consequences that you're going to be hearing from today. And if this advances on to select file, we'll have more discussion on how they have unintended adverse consequences. But just a couple of things I wanted to clear up. This package aims to reduce what property owners pay in property taxes and shifts the responsibility to consumers for this tax increase. So we're going from 5.5% to 6.5%. Right now, Nebraska's in the middle of the pack for sales tax. This puts us at number 9. I know the Platt Institute had sent out a number of information and summaries saying, you know, we want to be in the top 10. We want to be in the top 10 for the lowest taxes. But this puts us in number 9 place for the highest sales tax of those that are surrounding us. So this sales tax increase, this tax increase for all but Nebraska top earners, the sales tax increase will on average be greater than any property tax cut they may receive. Raising the state rate from 5.5 to 6% would put Nebraska at a tie for the 9th highest sales tax rate in the nation, and a tie for the highest rate among our neighbors. The other thing I handed this out on Thursday before we adjourned for the Easter recess, and it is from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. And, you know, we've talked about progressive tax, regressive tax, and I draw your attention to the total taxes. It shows that the working families of Nebraska, they pay a higher percentage of their hard-earned dollars and the taxpayer dollars that they send to the state of Nebraska in total taxes. And I wanted you to focus on sales and exercise tax because that's what we're talking about today, a sales tax increase. And it shows that the lowest 20%, it takes 5.5% of their disposable income, but the top 1% takes 1.1% of their income. So we know that this tax is going to be impacting our Nebraska families so much harder. And you know, Senator Erdman is right. This is not a solution to come up with property tax relief long-term. Remember, back in 2022, they passed the largest corporate income tax reduction in LB 873. This last year, we passed and accelerated that income tax and corporate income tax reduction that has impacted our revenues. So this is how much it's going to cost. This year, we're losing revenues of $389 million this year. Next tax year, $572 million. You've heard
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. You've heard me say this before. Put a pause, put a break on the income tax reduction for next year, because guess what? It comes up to $572 million. You're trying to scramble and scrap together a tax increase of $650 million on a package that does not address our fiscal responsibilities. It is not sustainable, this ginormous tax reduction for corporate and the highest income earners that are not likely to spend it and generate a multiplier effect like our working families. Next year, $572 million. Put a pause, put a break on that tax reduction, and we've got part of our problem and issue solved. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Armendariz, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we have about 4 hours left in this debate, and I've been listening intently and understand. I sit on appropriations, and I know appropriations and revenue have been working hard to get to the governor's goal of a major tax reduction for property taxes. So when I was campaigning, this is my second session in the legislature. When I was campaigning, overwhelmingly, property taxes are the #1 issue in the state. I don't think anybody is arguing that. I was advised while campaigning that just tell people we don't do that at the state level. There's nothing we can do. Property taxes are assessed at the local level. This is a proposal for us to offset some of the property tax you pay at the local level and putting it back on the state for schools. So we're proposing that the state pick up a bigger share of the school tax. And that does put us more in line with some surrounding states as well. Now, don't get confused on the numbers. So the sales tax increase in this bill is 1 cent. Could possibly go from 5.5, well, we're at 5.5, and could possibly go to 6.5%. That is going to depend on what revenues are July 1 of this year. Could be lower if revenues are higher than expected. I have been hearing messages on throwing a percentage on that 1 cent. Yes, you can put a percentage on it. To put that into perspective, if the sales tax was 1 cent and went to 2 cents, that would be a 100% increase. So don't get confused with percentages of increases. This is a 1 cent per dollar spent. We are still excluding food, and we're also adding an exclusion of utilities. In case you didn't know, you were paying taxes on utilities before, and you no longer will do that. There are a lot of people that were not taking the property tax credit, especially the lower income folks. The property tax plan we're proposing would include everyone get the credit now. So the people that are on the lower income that were not claiming it will now get it. There are other things we're working with appropriations, so it will cost the state more, obviously, to pick up a larger share of the school. And in appropriations in our budget, we did work on that. That was the cash sweeps of the agencies that you all may recall if you've been watching. Some of the agencies were holding in their cash reserve 3-4 times what their annual spend is, and we went in and swept those. We also passed a bill last year for an efficiency audit so that we can reduce spending in those same agencies and broader. What I would suggest to cap spending, which is essentially what needs to happen for property tax to stay low and for this to stay effective, everybody in the state needs to push on their local taxing entities to go in and do the same efficiencies. We need to demand that all taxing entities do efficiency audits of all of their governing bodies to reduce waste. And I have talked to some that admittedly say they have waste. They don't go and clean it out. That's what needs to happen at the local level. Elect county commissioners, school board members that are willing to do that at your local level. That's what my suggestion would be, and I am full support of this first step in the tax plan, LB 388. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Armendariz. Senator Decay, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in continued cautious optimism to LB 388 and the proposed tax package. I think the way to address property tax is twofold. First, we need to better balance out the so-called three-legged stool of property income and sales taxes. The average Nebraskan in recent years paid about $2,700 a year in property taxes, $1,600 a year in income taxes, and $1,200 in sales tax. We have let this trend continue to linger for too long. I think parts of LB 388 will help bring back more balance in terms of what Nebraska pay for each of the three main types of taxes. Second, there needs to be more thought put into the levy caps. My main concern with the package is whether the numbers put forward will actually result in expected amounts of tax relief we are saying on this floor. We have continually allocated more money to property tax relief, but I don't recall my property taxes really going down in Northeast Nebraska. Last year, we saw many schools override the cap we put into place. Last year, take full
7% granted under LB 243. Now, there were some schools that used the full 7% to bring them back to the status quo, and I suppose that is fine. At the same time, I was a bit frustrated to see several schools across the state vote to take the override money to get a windfall and end up not reducing their property tax levies. We are getting to a point where voters are speaking with their wallets and choosing to vote down school bonds because they are frustrated and paying more in property taxes. I do think what Senator Bolstar and others have put forward with the 6% for public safety is acceptable, given the difficulty of trying to recruit and retain law enforcement in rural areas, because right now a lot of our county deputies are leaving to go to Lincoln and Omaha. At the same time, I question whether we will see a repeat of last year and the levies will continue to go up even though we're putting up more state dollars. I will be voting to advance LB 388 and LB 1331 if we get to that bill to select file to have a fiscal note and get more clarity on how this bill will financially impact Nebraskans. The numbers of the governor's office and the revenue committee look pretty good. A 45% decrease in average state school property taxes compared to last year is very attractive and should be more than enough to offset the financial impact to most people from the sales tax changes prescribed in LB 388. I want to be clear, though, that if the numbers we have been referencing are way off base from what the fiscal office puts together, that could be a serious problem with me. I yield the remainder of my time to Senator Jacobson. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Decay. Senator Jacobson, 1 minute, 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I just want to really touch on a couple of issues. I'm in the queue here later, and I'll maybe go a little deeper into it. I know there's been a lot of talk about this is only a funding side. We don't have the other piece of this. Well, that's because this is a revenue committee bill, and as has been expressed before, there's an education bill 1331 as amended that will be hooked up with 388 to bring this total picture together. So we're on general file today, and the plan today would be to vote this, vote for cloture, get this kicked to select file, do the same thing with 1331. Everybody will know what's in both bills. We'll get those two bills moving together and pass them as one combined package. One does not work with the other. 1331 doesn't work without the funding, and the funding source needs to be targeted with the rules that are outlined in 1331. So
1 minute.
So people that are looking at LB 388 need to keep in mind that you've got to look at 1331 as amended before you can really see the full picture. I would encourage you, there was a tremendous article written in today's North Platte Telegraph that really, I think, lays out very succinctly what these two bills combined will do for property tax rates and hence property tax paid in Lincoln County and North Platte. And I think it's a very well-written article. It's a very balanced article, and really it lays out all of the pieces. When I was knocking on doors 2 years ago, I heard one consistent theme: lower my property taxes. There's a lot of groups out there that want to attack me and others in this body for being spendaholics and all these crazy things. I was elected to represent my constituents. That's what I'm doing. I'm lowering their property taxes, and I'm doing it incrementally, and I'm doing it in a solid sort of way. No one's going to like everything about it, but this is a good bill. Move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I stand in support of the IPP motion and not in support of the underlying bill because, as I know, like all of you know, eventually we'll be talking about AM 3203, and I have a lot of issues with that. So I'm going to tell you how I'm feeling about all of this, because I really want you to kind of consider what I'm saying, especially for those of you that talk to your political subdivisions, because we do know that all politics is local. We know that when it comes down to the wire, people want their garbage taken out, their snow removed. They want to know that when they call 911 that first responders come, and they come in a timely manner. And I have grave concerns about these services when I'm looking at bills like this. So as a state, we've always somehow restricted the ability of our political subdivisions to fully control their own tax policy. And we can do that because we are a Dillon's Rule state. But I believe, especially over the last 6 years, that there's been a proliferation of several policies that I think really show a more hostile type of state control over local policies. And I think if you talk to most of our counties, they're going to be in agreement with me. So for example, once you get to AM 3203, it sharply erodes Sarpy County's ability to handle their budget. Things like infrastructure, insufficient community services, you literally are stymieing our growth. It's like you're trying to push us to rely on more aggressive revenue sources like user charges, criminal fines. You want us to relieve your burden by creating a secondary burden. If you look at page 4, line 10 on AM 3203, you are capping what we can spend when it comes to law enforcement. And the justification is, well, it won't be capped. It's going to be based on income and benefits, or compensation is what I was told, but income, compensation and benefits if they're understaffed. Well, you know, you look in Sarpy County and we're not understaffed because we pay fair wages, because we have good leadership. I look at Sarpy County Sheriff's Department, La Vista, Papillion, Bellevue. We have great law enforcement agencies. So we're punishing them for being fully staffed. And should they need additional resources, we want to make sure that we make it as hard as we can to access funds that we normally have access to. I really feel that instead of doing what we've been doing the last 6 years, we should really repeal existing statutes and avoid enacting new ones, be it tax policy or be it how we do business at the political subdivisions. Because with this and so many other bills, we've become a nanny government in Nebraska. I know that when I vote for somebody at a local level, that I am asking those people at the local level to do their job, to do it well, to balance our budget. But then, not only does the state put into guidelines how we can utilize much of the money that we take in and spend, but we've decided to make it harder for them. Even though, and again, we can do that. It says in state statute that we can do that. But when we have fast-growing counties like Sarpy County, and I think if I looked at our last report from the Research Council, that also Saunders County is now a fast-growing county. If we look at these counties and we look at their ability to grow and we look at their ability to handle the crisis, what are we doing? We're doing this saying that if we do all these things, we can lower property taxes, but we're creating a secondary issue.
1 minute.
For me, if I'm going to stand here on the mic and say I support law enforcement, then I'm going to protect law enforcement when it comes to laws that I think are going to hurt them in the long run. If I say I support Sarpy County and the great job that they've done, from the jail that they've built, to the services that they provide, to the economic growth that they provide within Nebraska, I'm going to not vote for bills like this. It's getting out of hand. Where's the plan, the real plan? I still see a short-term plan. I don't see this working in the long term. And I know that Senator Linehan will stand up and correct me on some of these things, and that's why I love debate. But I do think we're going in the wrong direction, and we have been for many years. And we're going to have to eventually justify this as to why we're doing it. We need to get our own house in order before we start messing in other people's houses. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I still stand in opposition to LB 388, but since the introducer only got a 1-minute refresh, I'd like to yield my time to Senator Linehan.
Senator Linehan, you have 4 minutes, 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Okay, a lot of misinformation is floating around, and it's not just, it's nobody. All of us get buried in information between emails and cities and counties and schools and the chambers. So let's just some facts here. The open skies, and other people are going to talk to this. The idea that somehow this is harshest on low-income people is just not true. I will have examples. I took the open sky examples that they used, and I will have them hopefully before noon. Staff is making sure my math is correct right now. But you only pay sales tax on things, if we pass the bill, that you don't need to survive. You don't pay sales tax on rent. You don't pay sales tax on food. If this bill passes, you don't pay sales tax on utilities. Now, if you're a family of four making $40,000 a year, how much money do you have left after you pay rent, for food, and utilities? That's what you have to say the 1 penny increase is. So let's say these people are very frugal and they have a garden. Let's say it's $5,000. That would be a $50 increase compared to what they're getting in a property tax decrease of at least $1,000. And let's take Omaha, for example. Not only do you have to pay your water bill if you live in Omaha city limits, but Senator Frederickson's looking at me, I think he'll agree, there's a $50 surcharge every month on your water bill. So that's $50, that's $600 a year that everybody in Omaha city limits is paying in utilities, that they're paying sales tax on. So I've got examples, I'll show them out, you do the math. How much income do you have left after you pay for utilities, food? Some of you are in that situation that work here in the legislature. You're young, you have families. After you pay your mortgage, your food, do you have a lot of it? Are you buying a lot of $150 handbags? $200 pairs of shoes? The people who will pay the extra sales tax are the people that have disposable income, that can buy a new car every 3 years. I've got one new car in my whole life. You buy a new car, you pay a lot of sales taxes. Buy a used car, depending on, you can pay a lot too, but it's not what a new car. So you're talking about people that buy cars every 3 years, or they lease their cars. They're the ones that are going to pay the majority of this tax. And the other thing that's a little frustrating, the 1107 works fine for those of us with accountants and those of us that itemize and pay attention. We've got, I think it's 60% or 65% of the people in the Omaha city limits aren't claiming it. So they're not getting it. So don't stand up here and say, well, they're already getting this credit. We know they're not. The other, and I mentioned this previously, but I'm going to drill down on it today. TIOSA is broken. It's been broken for ag for a decade.
1
It
minute.
is now going to be broken for Lincoln, Millard, Norris, Waverly, any of your schools that we got on equalization aid that have had huge valuation increases. They're going to lose their state aid. It's the way the system works. So those of you that live in Lincoln Public Schools or represent Lincoln Public Schools, we don't do this. What you're actually voting for is a 23% increase in property taxes for your schools next year. 23% increase versus that. That's your choice. And people outside the body that are making phone calls to senators don't understand that. So don't take advice from people that don't know what they're talking about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Frederickson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraskans. Hope everyone had a nice, restful, long weekend. So I've been listening to the debate. I started listening to it last week, and I'm continuing to listen to it this morning and today. And I'm going to be really frank. I genuinely have a lot of admiration for the folks who are working on this bill, who are trying to make this bill better. I think that I've mentioned this a couple of times on the mic. Both the Appropriations Committee and the Revenue Committee have had very difficult tasks in front of them this year with some of the goals that were set by the executive branch. And so I genuinely appreciate the work that they're doing. And and all that's gone into this. One thing I did want to bring up and just sort of bring to our attention a little bit as a body that I haven't yet heard been spoken about on this bill quite yet is that we haven't really acknowledged the significant tax relief and the tax cuts that we passed last year in last session of this biennium. And I'm bringing that up because one, I think that's something that we should be, I think those were historic and very significant and something we should be proud of as a state. But two is that we haven't had a very long runway for those to go into effect. And so we have projections, we have ideas on what we can expect for the state's budget based on last year's tax cuts, but we haven't actually seen the impact that that's going to have on the state's budget and the state's coffers, for lack of a better word, in the longer term. And so I am maybe sounding fiscally conservative here, but I tend to sort of think we should maybe pump the brakes a bit on some of these cuts that we've been pursuing in different ways. The other thing that I have some questions about, so the Revenue Committee's put together various examples. I think I've got 5 or 6 of them in front of me about different parts of the state, so different scenarios. So depending on where you live, so Omaha, Lincoln, Beatrice, Hickman, do you rent, do you own, do you have a mortgage? And I think that's actually super helpful to look through. But one question I have is that every single scenario that's handed out, there seems to be a winner. And there seems to be less taxes being paid in every single scenario. And so my question is, if everyone's paying less, then where is this money coming from? Where are we getting the money? And there's a couple of ways we can look at that. One is from the sweeps that have occurred, the cash fund sweeps. And if that's the case, my concern is that that's in no way, shape, or form sustainable. We're not going to be able to sweep our cash funds every 2 or 3 years to make up for that. But if it's not all coming from the sweeps, then the response is it's coming from a tax increase. It's coming from a sales tax increase. So to say that this is all tax cut is, the money has to come from somewhere. It's not that everyone's going to be paying less. Someone's going to have to pay more. It has to come from somewhere. And if it doesn't, then the writing's on the wall that says the next step in this is to cut in the future. So there's high risk of passing this. If everyone's paying less, the state's budget is going to get less and less and less and less and less. Cutting services. We just cut $15 million to mental and behavioral health this year. Those types of things will continue unless there's more income coming in. The money has to come from somewhere. The other thing is, it's been said that there's no good vote on this bill, and that kind of made me laugh a little bit because maybe that's true. I don't know. I actually think there is a good vote. I don't think this is ready for prime time. Clearly if statements are being made that there isn't a good vote on the bill, then to me that says this is probably not something, thank you, Mr. President, probably not necessarily something that's ready for prime time. This is, and going back to what I was saying earlier, this is sort of a bit of a David and Goliath. This is trying to do a very significant thing. I have nothing but respect for the folks who have worked hard, who are trying to figure out how to make this better, how to make this more palatable. As it currently stands, though, I can't support LB 388 the way it is written. And I'm going to continue to listen to the debate. I'm going to continue to listen to folks who are negotiating in good faith and trying to make something work. But as it currently stands, I'm not able to support it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson. Senator Von Gilleren, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraskans. I want to start off my comments this morning echoing something that I actually posted on social media this weekend, and that is, Nebraskans, if you're watching this, please make a note to check your lines 36 and 37 on your Nebraska State 1040N form. Those are the 2 lines where your 1107 credits show up. This is work that the legislature has passed over the past 3 years. And it's the tax credit for a portion of your school taxes that are paid, and for a portion or for all of what is paid towards your community college portion of your tax bill. So it'll vary, your credit will vary based on what school district you live in. My credit amounted to about 20% relief in my property taxes. It's a credit that, again, comes back through your income taxes, and if we're successful in passing 388, that'll get shifted, that'll get changed to where that'll get front-loaded and go directly to the school districts, which we believe is a more efficient way to process that property tax relief. But I do want to make a point. If you have not filed your taxes yet, make sure that you catch lines 36 and 37. If you have filed your taxes, go back and make sure that you or your preparer caught those credits, because it's a substantial amount of relief that this legislature has passed in recent years. So just a few comments about 388 as we get started here this morning. There's a lot of folks that are talking about not being excited about a tax shift, and frankly, I kind of fall into that same category. But once we sat down and ran the numbers, I became much more comfortable with it. And Senator John Kavanaugh reviewed one of my spreadsheet examples. I want to draw attention, and I'm going to check the math on that. I got a chance to visit with him very briefly here, but if you go back to example 4, that's the lowest income example in the packet. And example 4 is representative of a renter and a family, presuming a family income of about $45,000. And those folks end up, according to the math that we did here, about $69 a head. After the reduction, after the elimination in the sales tax on residential utilities, and after the increase of 1% in sales tax. What that does not take into account is the federal earned income tax credit. If you have a family of 4 and you're earning a family income of $60,000, there's a $6,604 earned income tax credit. So the odds of being in that income tax bracket, $60,000 or less, and paying anything in income tax is very low. I want to draw attention to the handout that Senator Raybould passed out here, and I want to challenge at least one or more of these numbers. The percentage of sales tax, the categories of taxes on this sheet, the lowest income category says less than $30,000. If you look at the sales and excise taxes, they're claiming that those families will spend 5.5% of their income in sales taxes. Well, the state sales tax rate is 5.5%. And so that, back to Senator Linehan's comment, not every dollar that you spend, particularly in a lower to moderate income bracket, is taxed. This number, the number on this sheet for sales and excise tax, would be reflective of 100% of your income being spent on taxable items. And we know that that's not the case. You got to live somewhere, that's not taxed. Got to pay your utilities under this program, that won't get taxed. Got to buy groceries, that's not taxed. If you're unfortunate and you have to have some medical expenses, those aren't taxed.
1 minute.
Your gas, thank you, Mr. President. Your gasoline is subject to an excise tax, that won't be sales taxed. So as you add these things up, it really shoots some pretty big holes in this sheet that was passed out, the Nebraska State and Local, under the who pays. It says that that's the organization. I have no idea who that is. So those same theories, those same comments apply as you go through this graph, presuming that 100% of the income is taxed. 388 eliminates a number of exemptions. We started out with a longer exemption list, and we pared that down to something that we thought would be more palatable. And I'm very, I think what is in the bill at this point is very reasonable and should be acceptable to most of those on the floor. Again, eliminating the sales tax on residential utilities is a huge part of this. And frankly, that's my favorite part of the bill. I think that's something that we really, really need to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Von Gillerin. Senator Kauth, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, everyone who's watching. I'm going to reiterate this from my speech last week. Hyperbole and hysteria are not a good way to govern. This bill will not destroy the finances of the state. LB 388 is about balance. We need to reduce our property tax while raising our sales tax. At every door I go to, when we engage in these discussions, As I talk with people, they are so stressed about their property tax. They're stressed about not knowing what it's going to be, and then when it finally hits, having and feeling like they have no recourse. The ones who do go to before the Turk Commission report that it sometimes takes years. They very seldom get any sort of relief from it, and they're very frustrated. The elimination of taxes on utilities will significantly help lower income Nebraskans. So when we say that this plan doesn't help people who are poor or lower income, that's just not true. As Senator Von Gillern just stated, your taxes right now on utilities, they're being collected. I looked at my bill and it was, I believe, $932 for the month. They're taxing the entire amount, not just for the energy. Stretch that out to a year, that's $120 off of your utility bill if you have those taxes. $120, if you spend 1 cent, that's going to be $12,000 that you would have to purchase to actually spend that. This will save everyone money. By front loading the 1107 credits, schools are going to receive more, and that will lower their levies accordingly. And I will say the Millard Public Schools has been a great partner working with this, making sure that as our tax plans from last year went into effect, they've lowered their levies. We expect the schools will do the same. They will continue being solid partners. Hard caps on the political subdivisions of 3% plus growth will be a generational game changer. Political subdivisions can always go to a vote of the people to ask for an increase. That gives Nebraskans significantly more control. And when have we ever felt that we have complete control over how taxes are assessed? Reducing property taxes will make buying a home much easier. I've heard lots of people say, well, I rent and I can't afford to buy. Well, you can't afford to buy partly because when you look at that payment as a whole, your property taxes are put into that payment. If we lower those property taxes, it might just become affordable. This bill is not perfect, but nothing is. We cannot let perfect become the enemy of the good. There will be tweaks we have to make. We'll make those in successive years as we see how it's going. We have to take the first steps. LB 388 is a great step in the right direction. And I yield my time to Senator Hansen if he's interested.
Thank you, Senator Cowles. Senator Hansen, you have 1 minute and 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's a saying on here that I'm having kind of an issue with, is when I hear from the opposition that's saying this, if you're in favor of this, this is a tax increase. And I think Senator Rabel, actually, she had a pretty good saying that says it's a sleight of hand. One of the things that I'm hearing that is a sleight of hand is when people come up here and say, if you're in favor of this, this is a tax increase. There's something I learned in junior high economics class. It's called net benefit, right? And so I personally think property taxes in some way are an immoral tax. I think you never own your land, so that way the government always owns it. So if there's any way I can shift the tax burden away from property taxes onto sales tax or consumption tax, I will. So long as it results in a net benefit for the taxpayer, which basically means, yeah, I'm paying more in sales tax, however, my overall taxes have gone down, which is what I believe that this bill is trying to accomplish. Okay? If you're in favor of this, it's a tax increase. That is a sleight of hand. We're talking about the shell game. That's a shell game, is when they say something like that. It's called net benefit, people. Okay? And so now, do I have some concerns about this? Yes, my vote, I'm going to vote for this so I can move on a select file, because I know Senator Linehan is always willing to listen and work with people and move this forward with people's concerns in mind. I have little concerns about how the schools are going to maybe be able to increase their levy over the course of time as this bill moves forward. So I want a little bit more reassurance and guarantees that the school cannot increase their levies significantly over the course of the next few years if this bill passes. So that's something I'm going to work with Senator Linehan on between now and select file. So I encourage my colleagues to vote green on this. Any concerns you have, significant concerns, talk to Senator Linehan. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Lent, Mr. Clerk, for a message.
Thank you, Mr. President. Notice that the Education Committee will meet in executive session now in room 2022. Education Committee now, room 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've got several things from the governor's office. They've been very helpful. They've worked all weekend. So I want to go through a list of unclaimed 1107 credits in my area of Nebraska. Well, actually, I grew up in southeast Nebraska, but in Omaha, in 2022, 67% of the 1107 credits were unclaimed. 67%. How's that compare to Elkhorn, where I live, where incomes are higher? People have accountants. 35% didn't claim in Elkhorn. Douglas County community, that's where all the lakes are. It's Waterloo and Valley. Only 38% didn't claim. In Millard, and this is a shocking number, 50% of the people claimed it. Now, it's not that shocking because Millard is, you've got some very high-end homes and you have some apartments. So that makes sense. About, I would say, Senator Kauth would know this better, but I would say about half the people in Millard are upper income and the others not. Ralston, which Senator Reapy would know all about, where their free and reduced lunch is almost as high as Omaha, 70% did not claim the tax credit. Bennington, again, this would be Senator Armendariz' school district. I think she's got most of Bennington. Again, wealthy, upper income, only 35% didn't claim the credit. West Side, again, a school that has very wealthy and then a lot of apartments, so about half and half. 51% of the people didn't claim their credit. So the idea that this plan is some trick for the wealthy is ridiculous. I already claimed my credit, and I'm not that wealthy. You've got a whole bunch of people that we're saying we're getting property tax relief. They're not getting it. So I'm just dumbfounded by the arguments against this bill. I understand the chamber's arguments, and they're not going to be happy with me this morning, but that's fine. I'm not happy with them. In 2020, we did imagine. I agreed we needed incentives because our income taxes were too high. We fixed that last year. There should be more appreciation than there seems to be on that subject. I also this morning got text about worrying about TIF because, oh my goodness, if we lower property taxes, TIF won't work quite so well. Well, you know what? I don't care. I don't care. If the argument against this bill from the business community and the cities is we can't lower property taxes because that'll hurt TIF, it's astounding to me. I've known that. I've argued it with people that every time you use TIF, it hurts us at the state because we have to come up with more school funding. It's not a good reason to be against property tax relief because TIF won't be as meaningful. Bad idea. I don't know if people haven't got the information, if we're not communicating well enough, but here's the state aid change in 3 years. Adams Central, ag community, runs around Hastings.
1 minute.
Their state aid will go up 227%. Ainsworth, another ag community, state aid up 366%. Allen Consolidated Schools, state aid up 331%. And I'm not just picking the big ones here, I'm reading from the top of the list. For decades, and ever since we've been here, Open Sky, Stand for Schools, everybody says we need more state aid, more state aid. The governor's plan, this plan, is trying to move us, well, we did move last year from like 48th up to kind of the middle pack. This moves us up to number 8 in the nation in state funding for our schools. And all the people that have said for a decade or two that the problem is we don't have enough state funding are against the bill. I don't know how you solve a problem when you do everything they've asked for 10 years and then they're against the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan.
I'll be right back.
Senators Blood and Sanders have some guests in the north balcony. Leadership Bellevue from the Bellevue Chamber of Commerce and Community. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Jacobson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, colleagues, I'd like to just get back on some of the focus that we've been talking about before. I always have to chuckle a little bit when we talk about picking winners and losers, because when we start looking at sales tax, it's not the business that pays the sales tax, it's the customer. And when you look at sales tax, and we pointed this out before, when you look at the inequities between sales tax, income tax, and property tax, the three main taxes that are assessed in Nebraska. Just as a refresher, property tax collections last year was a little over $5.3 billion. Sales income tax was about a little over about 4.2, 4.3 billion, and the sales tax $2.3 billion collected by the state. We have local option sales taxes. Let me just tell you, in North Platte, we have a 1.5% local option tax, but then the voters, by 66% of the voters in the last special election, voted to increase the local option tax by ½ cent to pay for a new rec center and swimming pool that were built back in World War II time. And I will tell you, they wanted that, preferred that over a property tax increase. In fact, they would have voted down a property tax increase. So why are sales tax less objectionable? Because anyone that's coming through our state and shopping here are leaving sales tax dollars here. They're helping pay that $2.3 billion. It's not being paid by the residents themselves on ports of what is sold by people traveling through the state. I think all of us can relate to motels. If you go and make a reservation at a hotel, what's the question you ask? You ask the question, what's the rate? And they might tell you it's $150 a night. Do you go on to say, what's the sales tax rate? What's the occupation tax going to be? What are the other expenses? Generally speaking, no. Now, I'm pretty sure Senator Clements asked that question, but most people don't, okay? And I will tell you that I just got an invitation to go to an event in Washington, D.C. The motel cost is going to be $350 a night, and there's a 15% tax that goes on top of that. Okay? And people pay that all the time. I will tell you, when you go to our mall in North Platte, they passed an EEA, an enhanced employment area. It's a 1.95% sales tax, in addition to the regular local option tax, and in addition to the state sales tax. Has it impacted sales? Not one bit. Not one bit. Because people wanted that local option to buy goods in that mall. And it paid for infrastructure of the mall. I'm just telling you, this is probably the easiest way that we're going to get real property tax relief. The only way we're going to get there is take from something else to fund it. I prefer someplace where others are going to help pay for it. So with that, I'm going to pause. I'm going to see if Senator Von Gillern would like to take the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Senator Von Gillern, you have 1 minute, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. One thing I didn't get to in my previous comments was talking about the spending caps that are included in LB 388. And I think if we went around the room, I think I could get 49 people on this floor to agree that spending is the issue. We can argue about where we're going to collect the money, whether it's sales tax, income tax, property tax, excise tax. But the one thing we would all agree on is that spending is the issue. I proposed a bill that would offset levies and appraisal values, and we ended up tabling that in favor of another bill that we ended up melding into 388 that applies these caps on local taxing authorities. It would be on counties and school districts. There's a school district cap that was passed last year, and we called it a soft cap because it was able to be overridden. And turns out a number of districts overrode that, but only a small number actually capitalized upon the tax-taking authority on that. But anyway, in my homework for my 1241, I did some research. Local property taxes levied by local governments in Nebraska from 2014 to 2023 increased 49%. That's compared to an inflation rate increase of 28.6%. So your local taxing authorities outpaced inflation in their tax taking by 20%.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Von Gilleren. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you very, very much. Sorry, that was a little abrupt. It seems like Senator Von Gilleren was still going there. Colleagues, I rise not necessarily in support of the IPP, still not in support of LB 388, and right now against it largely more based on the formula of how things are in this graph on where the funding mechanisms come from. There's a couple of high-level things I wanted to make sure to focus on. I am opposed to a majority of the tax shift or the tax increase coming from sales tax increase. And part of the reason is, and this is a bit of a thank you to previous Governor Ricketts, the work that we did in appropriations for the last 8 years has been largely focused on trying to be more fiscally conservative and also trying to reduce our spending obligations. It means, and I've had some of my colleagues on the floor frustrated we're not spending more on a lot of things, either new projects, new programs, better fund on existing programs. And, you know, we do understand that, we feel that, but in terms of the nexus of the committee and where we tended to land in the last several years, we had biennium budgets where we were somewhere in between 2 to 2.5 to 3%, and on average being around 2.5% made us one of the leanest appropriations committees and budgets that we put out for these last 8 years. And I think one of the benefits of doing that is when we compound the reduction in spending and lean spending, if any spending, it was really enabled us to be able to make room for a lot of the tax relief, the $6 billion in tax relief that's been done for property, for income, for corporate, for all these things, things that I voted for, that many of us voted for, and my committee focused on trying to reduce that spending. The other reason we reduced that spending was so that we can make room for the property tax credit fund and make sure we're funding that in its totality, and the homestead exemption, again, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. I think there's a good formula here, and I think Senator Erdman mentioned this, and part of the good formula, which may not meet the needs of some of us that are on our last year, but for the rest of us that are sitting here, is if we expect revenues to increase in these next couple of years from income tax, and if we continue to reduce our spending, and we look at some of the credits that Senator Linehan had talked about, specifically some of the corporate credits that we have passed in the years, and we reduce or eliminate some of the exemptions that have been targeted, some of which are popular or not unpopular, then we can find enough funding to provide really meaningful tax relief that would fund a lot of this. Because it looks like the 1% sales tax increase is to the tune of about $500 million in 26 and 27. So the question is where we be able to find $500 million of funding, either from offsets with spending, reductions in some of these other areas, cigarette tax, sales tax, which I'm actually fine with, and the vaping product increase, the lottery sales tax. Those ones I could live with and would vote for if it was just those $200 million of other things other than the 1% sales tax increase. The other thing that I do support, which I do appreciate Senator Von Gilleren mentioning, is I support spending caps. Because if we don't rein in the spending for local schools and local entities on the tighter caps,
1 minute.
we are going to be back in a scenario where we're spending too much. This is a bigger part of the problem that I really hope we can. I've pushed for legislation and transportation to try to do a vote of the people for occupation taxes. Didn't get that out of committee. But the gist of it was basically there are these other taxes, occupation taxes being one of them, just like property taxes, which if they keep going up, maybe we should start to reduce or put caps on the spending that can be had, because that's the way that we will reduce our overall reliance. We have to change some of the habits. So I agree with Senator Von Giller on that. But in regards to the 1% sales tax increase, I don't support that. I support the others that are here, revenue generators or the offsets, the shifts, whatever we want to call them. But I represent a district that has a high percentage of renters, and they're not going to be seeing, and many people in the Omaha area may not see as significant of any tax.
That's your
cuts.
time,
Thank
Senator.
you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Meyer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, or Mr. Speaker, and good morning, Nebraskans. It's how many times this morning have we heard the term tax shift? Being from rural Nebraska, we have seen that incremental tax shift for the last 15 years. I'm reminded of the story of the bullfrog. You drop him in a pot of cold water and bring it to a boil, and he won't even know that it's boiling, and pretty quick he's dead. That's the way it's been with property taxes in rural Nebraska. You drop that same bullfrog in a pot of boiling water, he's going to jump right out and survive. Well, that's kind of where we are here. We're at a point where the incremental shift has happened. So it's a little late and a little melodramatic to call it a tax shift now, because it's already happened. We're just hoping to even the three-legged stool a little bit. The Platt Institute has long said that removing sales tax exemptions to broaden the sales tax base is just a necessary step to a solid financial future for the state of Nebraska. You know, one thing that hasn't been talked about a lot, and as soon as the bill was introduced, I thought to myself, now that's a common sense approach, and that's Senator Wayne's bill to exempt home utilities. I mean, that is a real common sense thing that it would be nice to do for all Nebraskans, low income, high income, everybody, because that's something that we absolutely have to have. But without 388 and the sales tax situation and that is not going to happen. And there also seems to be a feeling in this body that, and maybe some of the other groups like the Omaha Chamber and the Lincoln Chamber, that all sales taxes paid in the metropolitan areas are paid by the folks that live there. And nothing could be further from the truth. I see a delivery truck from Nebraska Furniture Mart in my community almost weekly, sometimes twice a week. And guess what? Those are people that pay sales tax in Omaha and get the furniture in rural Nebraska. That happens all the time. It's kind of the same way with lodging taxes. We've talked about the good life areas. We've talked about things like that. Guess what? It's not the people that live in Omaha, Lincoln, that pay lodging taxes. It's the rest of us. It's every visitor that comes through Nebraska, and we love that, and that's the way it's designed. Additionally, we talk about revenue in Nebraska and always being short. We have some very, very telling needs, and one of them that I'm passionate about is Senator Frederickson's LB 856, the child care teacher subsidies. We can't do that unless we somehow raise some more revenue. It's just not possible. Another one is preschool spots in Nebraska. Another one is maybe homestead exemptions that people who really, really need that. Well, without some of these sales tax changes, those necessary things just will not happen. So I'm fully supportive of LB 388. I think it's a very, very balanced approach to what we need to do in Nebraska. So with that, I'll yield my time to Senator Von Gillern.
Thank you, Senator Meyer. Senator Von Gillern, you have 1 minute, 20 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just finish up the thought that I started earlier regarding the caps, and I appreciate Senator Vargas agreeing on that comment and the fact that we're of the same mindset there. And again, I think if we polled the room, there's 49 in the room that would agree that caps or some form of caps or at least spending is the issue.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. So again, this testimony that I put together showed that local property taxes levied by local governments from 2014 to 2023 increased 49%. Over that same time period, I ran an inflation calculator by the Federal Reserve Bank. Inflation increased 28.6%. And as I pointed out in my last moment on the mic before, that's a 20% delta. It's a 20% difference. But Senator Moser pointed out to me as he walked by, he said, that's a 50% increase. They're spending twice as much as the inflation value at the local levels. If we don't find a way to put spending caps in place, this problem is just going to continue to go down the road. Senator Linehan said that we're looking at a 23% increase this next year. If we don't do anything, that's a property tax increase. We've got to do something to stop the bleeding and bring this to a halt, and spending caps are certainly the way to get that done. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Von Gilleren. Senator Albright, you're recognized to speak. Senator Brandt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, Nebraska. I fully support LB 388 and I stand opposed to the indefinitely postpone. The majority of my emails run for 388. They are not opposed to it. The majority of my emails come from District 32, Fillmore, Thayer, Jefferson, Saline, and southwestern Lancaster County, a very rural part of the state. So I guess my question to the opponents, if not this, then what? What is the alternative? What is your idea? Of everybody in here, the one that stands out actually is Senator Erdman. Senator Erdman offered an alternative here. He had an idea. Outside of that and LB 388, I haven't seen a lot of options here on the floor, but I've heard a lot about sales tax and how awful sales tax is. And what concerns me is on the floor, and we're supposed to be the leaders for the state, is we've fractured our tax policy. We've got a group over here that's just sales tax people, and we've got a group here that's just income tax people, and we've got a group here that's just property tax, and we need to look at the whole thing welded together. What's best for the people of the state of Nebraska? If you don't want to increase sales tax, I can live with that. We introduced a bill 1372, and what that does is it stops the decline in income tax. It's not an sales tax increase, and it doesn't shift taxes. It just slows down the 5-year glide path on decreasing income taxes, and our numbers show that would raise about $250 million a year. So we've been shifting costs from the state to our local schools for many years. When the state runs short of money, they cut school funding because the property taxpayers, the local ones, will pick up the bill. Property taxes are assessed at the local level by the state because until last year, we were forced higher and higher in rural Nebraska because of our school costs. And the state was paying less and less to the schools. We need to vote 388 through to general, if for no other reason, so we get an accurate fiscal note on what this could cost the state. I will also support 1331 when the Education Committee gets that component out, and that's critical. That is the school finance half of this bill. I know earlier Senator Linehan had talked about TIF, and I have gotten some of those emails too. Here again, TIF doesn't do anything for District 32. TIF has some unintended consequences out there on the TIOSA formula. If somebody wanted to lead the effort to get rid of TIF, I'll be right there with you. Remember this, 75% of the benefits from LB 388 go to houses and businesses. Only 25% of the benefits of this bill will go to ag land in the state of Nebraska. This is not about wealthy. This is not about farmers. This is truly a bill for everybody in the state of Nebraska. Once again, I'll vote no on the IPP. I'll vote for 388. With that, I would yield the rest of my time to Senator Dorn.
Thank you, Senator Brandt. Senator Dorn, you have 1 minute and 10 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Brandt. Wanted to get up and talk a little bit about, I did last week, about our green sheet. If you remember, I talked about on the first page, page 22, we came to the floor with $549 million right in line 22, line 21. That's our minimum reserve, which we have to be at the end of this fiscal year when we adjourn here. I also talked about the column way to the right. There are minimum reserves, 337, 62 million we came to the floor with. You flip that page into the top of the page 3, we are now at 422 negative out there in 3 years. What does that do? We don't have to match that third year out there. We don't have to have that at 0. What that tells us, if the plugged in numbers, if they are accurate, when we come back and make the budget next year, we will be looking at a $422 million deficit. Several people have talked about we need to control spending. Well, this body does a terrible job of controlling spending.
That's your time,
Look at
Senator.
this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dorn. Senator Mosier, you're welcome. You're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, and good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraskans. Well, how did we get where we are? For a number of years, we had budget increases that were more than inflation, going back 10 years, 20 years. Those increases are put into the budget, and then the next year, another budget is drawn, and it's increased 3 or 4%, and those increases compound. And so our spending is to the point where it's beginning to pinch the budget. And in the past, the legislature has cut back on aid to schools to the point where we were in the 40s, 39 or 35 other states funded their education more generously than we did. And so we pushed that on to the local governments. And where's a school go to get money? They have nowhere else to go. They don't have excise taxes. They don't have sales tax. They have property tax. That's it. That, and then combined with the increase in valuation, the farming has been very good the last number of years. And farm ground has gone up from, a couple $1,000s an acre to what now is probably $10,000 an acre for good crop ground. And so that has given the local governments some breathing room to raise their budgets. But where would the state get 500 million, give or take, to try to reduce property taxes more and increase aid to schools? Sales tax is one way to do that. And I'm not a flag waving supporter of raising sales tax. I have to collect it every day. Every day I sell some little thing and then I add 7% to the total for the tax, and I get some negative feedback on that. And if it goes to 8%, it's going to be more of a negative feedback. So I don't like that. But what's the alternative? If we don't do this, we could go back and appropriations could tell every state agency that we're going to go to zero-based budgeting, and I want a 10% reduction from every state agency that wants an appropriation. Bring in a plan that shows 10% less spending this year than last year, or 5% less than last year. The total budget, what the state controls of it, is around $5 billion. So 10% would be $500 million. That would be equal to the 1% sales tax. Would you rather have a 1% sales tax, or would you rather have every state agency take a 10% cut? A lot of people who oppose 388, I think, would oppose the 10% cut for every agency more than the sales tax increase. So we're not in a real feel-good situation. We're in a spot where we've let things get out of whack over time, and we're going to have to make some belt tightening and some decisions that we're not 100% behind, but things need to be addressed. And 388 is one way to look at that. So I'd encourage you to support it. And if you don't like something in it, talk to the committee and to Senator Linehan in between general and select, and help get it to the point where you'll support it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, again, I rise in support of the IPP, and I would just say, Senator Mosier, we do have to do something. Senator Brandt addressed a proposal that he had brought about pausing the implementation of the corporate and income tax to help pay for some of these things. So there are other options out there that are not increasing sales tax, and so we don't need to act like it's a foregone conclusion that our only option is that. But I just wanted to go touch on a few points. We're going to get to lunch here in a minute. One is I still haven't heard. I've heard folks say we shouldn't be talking about people who currently get 1107. And I hear you. I get what you're saying, that there's a lot of folks who don't claim the 1107 money. I was saying that for years. It's interesting to hear the folks who are now jumping up and down in that, who were opposed to front-loading 1107 in past years, but now say that it's the panacea to our problems. But what I would say is that the front-loading of 1107 is a good idea. I agree with that idea. I think putting that so that it's easier to capture, that everybody actually gets it and they see it in their tax bill, that's a good idea. What I'm saying is there are some Nebraskans who currently claim 1107, and whether it's 40-some% in Omaha or 30-some% in Bennington, or I don't remember all the specific numbers, but those folks currently get part of the tax relief that we're talking about in this bill. And I say it is not 100% on the level to say that it is entirely new tax relief. That's my point. And that we need to have a conversation that is about what actually is happening. So for those folks who claim 1107, they are not getting as much tax relief as is being presented in all of these. And that when you talk to your constituents, if they are one who claims 1107, you have to say to them, we gave tax relief in this form, and yes, your taxes are going to go up as a result because of how this is structured. You're going to pay more in sales tax, and you are only getting this amount more in property tax reduction because you already did get that other property tax reduction. That's my point in saying we need to address that. So when you try to obfuscate and misdirect on that, that is problematic. And it makes it hard to understand what this bill actually does. And by the way, that's not in this bill. That's in a different bill, which I'm told, I think the Education Committee maybe just exec on now. So a bill that maybe is coming out sometime later this week. But that's not in this bill. This bill has the sales tax increase. This bill has an increase in tax on advertisements for digital advertisers, which, by the way, I did get a note, this is the other thing I wanted to talk about, from a small business that is just outside my district. It's in District 8 in Dundee, talking about E-Creamery, which is a wonderful ice cream store. If you have the opportunity to go, I take my kids there often. But they do a lot of their business online. Through sales online, they build their client base through online advertisements. And so they submitted a letter talking about how the portion of increasing the tax on digital advertising is going to adversely affect their business model. There's folks here from other digital industries, we'll say, who have a similar problem with this. We spent a lot of time talking about the tax increase on sales tax, but that's not the only tax increase we're talking about in here. And there are other tax exemption eliminations on veterinary services. Thank you, Mr. President, and others. But just because there are some things that are good ideas, like front-loading 1107, which, by the way, doesn't need a sales tax to be done, right? There are some mechanisms, I think, that would have to be changed to do that by itself, but that would be a good idea to do, but it does not require that increase in sales tax. Eliminating the sales tax on utilities would be a great thing to do as well, but that does not require an increase in sales tax overall either. So we can do some of the good things, and we don't have to do all of this. We don't need to be forced into this position to assume we have to increase sales tax. But if you're insistent on raising revenue, Senator Brandt's idea is one that has some merit. So I would suggest that we take another look at that as we're having this conversation. But as it stands, as LB 388 is written, I oppose it. I support the IPP, and I assume
That's
I'll
your
get us
time.
more times. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Boslin, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have been and will continue to be listening to the debate before making a final decision. I would agree with the comments, like many of you, when you meet with constituents, that their number one concern is property taxes. The second place concern isn't even close. However, I have reservations that a 1.5 cent or even a 1 cent sales tax increase was the solution that they envisioned to that problem. So that's the reality of where my concerns lie. Doing nothing will result in an increase in taxes for my district for school aid in the coming years. Doing nothing will not result in any property tax relief. And voting for this bill does result in a tax increase. And neither one of those options sit well with me, and I know several others. I know there's ongoing discussions going on right now, and I am hopeful that my colleagues are working on a compromise that all of us can be proud of and we can all support. And with that, I will yield the rest of my time to Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Senator Boslin. Senator Linehan, you have 3 minutes, 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Boslin. So I'm going to hand out some examples. As I said, I spent the weekend working, and one of the things I did is I took open skies examples and worked them in real life situations. So the first one is Boone County. Actually, the first one's Douglas County, but Boone County is on there. So their Boone County said the income was $41,000. The property value was $171,000. The school general fund levy is 51.5123. Their total levy in Boone County average is below $1, which is considerably lower than many of us pay. What you got to remember when you figure out what they might pay in sales tax, out of that $41,500 in income, you have to pay federal income taxes, in this case, $3,098. You have to pay Social Security taxes, in this case, be $3,175. State income taxes, $1,304. Property taxes, $1,646. Figure you have a mortgage of $1,000 a month. Don't pay sales tax on that, $12,000. Homeowners insurance, $200 a month, which is probably very low. Don't pay sales tax on that, $2,400. Health insurance, don't pay sales tax on that, $4,000 a year. Utilities, we'd like not to pay sales tax on that, $2,400. Taxes on utilities, $132. Food at $80 a week. This is for a single person. That's being frugal. $4,160. Don't pay tax on that. Gas, $30 a week, and that means they're not driving very far to work. It's $1,560. So your total subject that you might be subject to sales tax is $5,625, meaning you might pay another 309.37 cents in sales tax. Then you minus utilities out, which is $56.25. So your increase in sales tax would be $233.62. Your school property tax drops to your savings, excuse me, is $508. So you come out ahead, way ahead, almost $700 ahead for somebody making $171,000 a year. So I will continue on this. The other thing I want to talk about is we don't know that this is a 1 cent increase. And I'm working with people to try and figure out how to make sure we don't know. We have in the bill, there are triggers. So if our revenues are higher than they're anticipated, which I feel most certainly they will be, they were 100 million higher in March than was projected. April is our biggest tax month, because that's when people pay their taxes, don't get refunds. If that amount of money is what we need, there could be no tax increase this year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I do rise again opposed to LB 388 and in favor of the motion to indefinitely postpone, as we did last week. I think we're actually having a very good conversation with regards to a number of the things that are contained in this bill. And as I said last week as well, there's sort of two tracks that you can take about this bill. There's the 30,000-foot view, sort of how do you believe we should generally balance our economic structure in Nebraska argument. You know, do we think that sales tax are too low and need to be raised in order to offset property tax decreases, or is income and corporate tax the way to go? We can have that conversation. And we can also have a conversation separate and apart from that about the way that this bill works and the actual impact individually on people. I do still rise today opposed to a sales tax increase. And I want to respectfully push back on the idea that this is a shell game to say that this is a sales tax increase. What is contained in LB 388 is a trigger mechanism wherein most likely, in my opinion, the sales tax will increase by a particular rate. You can be opposed to a sales tax increase and still vote for the front loading of the 1107 credit in such a way that will have a wider distribution of property tax relief across the state. So this is not this catch-22 where if you vote for one, you have to be for the other and vice versa. You can be opposed to increasing the sales tax and still be in favor of overall property tax reduction, or at least property tax relief being provided in a more equitable manner through the front loading of the 1107 credit. The question then becomes, how do we pay for that? And I think there's a number of options. I posited last week the potential of the money that's set aside for the canal. I know a number of people have talked about that. Senator Brandt has talked about whether or not we should freeze the corporate income tax cuts that were imposed last year, which would not result in any tax increase. So there's been a number of options proposed. And so I guess I want to push back on the notion that there's not any solutions being set forth, because those are certainly things that have been talked about for the entirety of this session. It's just not what I think has really gotten put on the floor here today. So I do still stand opposed to that. I also want to talk a little bit about some of the numbers that are being discussed here. The idea that this does not disproportionately, that raising the sales tax does not disproportionately harm middle class and lower class people, I just disagree with. And we've talked a lot about regressivity versus progressivity, and I think there's two separate ways to look at it. Either you can look at the numbers on the page with regards to the net, as Senator Hansen was talking about, or you can talk about it from a philosophical perspective. And on both of those ways of analyzing this, I think that our working class or middle class people make it out worse. When you're just looking at the numbers on the page, I know we've been given a number of examples here with how this affects everyday people. And I think Senators John Kavanaugh and Senator Von Gillern had a good conversation about that. And I want to applaud Senator Von Gillern, because I know he's done a lot of really hard work on a lot of these examples. But when I was going through these, in particular, the one that is the low income renter, I was struck by a couple of the assumptions that were made in here with regards to income. So I think on this example we have before us, it's a $45,000 AGI, which is adjusted gross income. So $45,000 AGI, the assumption that's made right off the bat is their monthly rent. And the monthly rent that's assumed here is $2,000. I can tell you that I think the vast majority of people who are making $45,000 a year AGI can't afford or would not choose to pay for an apartment that is $2,000 a month in rent. Certainly when I was making more than that and renting, $2,000 a month in rent was fairly difficult, if not impossible, for me to make. And so if we drop that number down to something that I think potentially could be a little bit more reasonable, let's say $850 a month in rent, which is still a little high for some people, but not unreasonable. What that ultimately means is, rather than spending $24,000 a year on rent, you're spending about $10,200 a year. When you Thank you, Mr. President. When you take that number and you factor it through all of the things that are sales and use tax exempt, and then have a certain amount remaining over that you can assume the sales tax applies to, even when you get rid of the utilities sales tax, overall there is a net gain. And that there's a net increase in taxes. And that net increase in taxes, if you're making less money, is a bigger deal to you. if there's a net tax of additional $100 that you're paying, that means more to somebody if they only make $45,000 a year instead of $200,000 a year. And so and a lot of these are based on assumptions, and I know it's really difficult to really pin down exactly what all the expenses are, but that was just one calculation I looked at there. So I don't think anybody's intentionally doing a shell game, but when we start to look at the numbers, you really can look at it different ways. And I think, based on people I've talked to, this sales tax increase is going to hurt people. So again, colleagues, I would urge you to vote against LB 388.
That's your time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Raybold, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify a lot of mistaken ideas that were expressed. I want to thank Senator Von Gilleren. I know on the handout that shows the impact of sales tax on Nebraska families. It does clearly say groceries, but I think they made a mistake when we all know, hey, I'm a grocer. In a grocery store, there is no sales tax on food items. But if you buy toilet paper, if you buy detergent to launder your clothes, you pay sales tax. Senator Kauth said something, that all taxing, you need to talk to all your local taxing bodies, entities. You need to talk to your county government, your county commissioners. You need to talk to your city council about cutting waste. Holy cow, I remember these conversations so vividly. And for those of my wonderful colleagues who have not served in county government or on city council, this is like the drumbeat from the state of Nebraska. You need to tighten your belt. Governor Heineman was really big on this, but we're not focusing on the essential problem. How did that burden of property taxes mushroom so much to become our local tax problem? Well, it started with the state of Nebraska shifting, another cost shift, shifting the cost of public education to those local entities, your county, your school districts. And the only way to pay for it is in the property tax. Now, this has been going on for quite some time, even before Governor Heineman came up with that plan of shifting those costs. It started with the TIOSA formula. And I have to share with you one great story. Several of my colleagues, we went and attended a seminar on TIOSA so we could better understand the formula and how it impacts our income taxes and property taxes, et cetera. Well, here's an unintended adverse consequence when we lower property taxes. It's called allocated income tax funds. And you've heard me get up here and preach like so many unintended consequences. Some of the tax cuts on income and corporate are unsustainable. And I keep saying that. And here's one of the unintended impacts of lowering income tax. So some years ago, public education got 20%. It's called allocated income tax fund based on property taxes that are being paid. That got changed from 20% of that amount to now it's 2.23%. That's the amount of property taxes that are paid that actually go towards public education, 2.23%. And I love it because my fellow senators were listening to this and the light bulb went off in their head. They're like, oh, wait, if we lower property taxes, that means that 2.23% that goes towards public education gets diminished, gets decreased. And that's one of the unintended consequences is we keep aiming to go lower and lower and lower on property taxes by not front loading the responsibility to the Nebraska state government for this, we're going to have additional unintended consequences. Senator Dungan spoke so clearly about the additional taxes that are being added. It's not just the 1% onto sales tax, but it's all the other generated taxes that really have an impact. I wanted to talk about the sales tax or items that are sales tax exempt. That could take a whole summer and a whole interim study that should be done because we shouldn't be picking winners and losers. And the biggest loser on this one is on cigarettes, keeping that price going up, but consumable hemp, 100%. you know, they testified in favor. They thought, well, 1% increase is no big deal. This is going to impact small businesses in our city and in our state. The other drumbeat that I love to talk about is unfunded mandates. Senator Cowell said we need to tighten our belts. Well, how? How? When the state keeps pushing down unfunded mandates to fund things, how are we going to do it? With public safety costs increasing, the salaries to hire, to retain, to attract, new law enforcement's going up. And guess what? Their pension benefits are going up as well. How are we supposed to do this as a county government and city government? When infrastructure costs are going up, healthcare costs for our amazing workforce is going up.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Linehan would like to announce some guests in the north balcony. Students from Fire Ridge Elementary in Elkhorn. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 1108, 1120, 1169, and 1355, all placed on final reading. Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 1284, 934, 1023, 1370, 1017, and 253, placed on select file, some with ENR amendments. In addition to that, amendments to be printed to 388 from Senator Slama, Senator Sanders to LB 71. New resolutions, LR 458 by Senator Walls, 459 by Senator Ibaugh, and 460 by Senator Brewer. All will be read and laid over. Amendments to be printed to 686 from Senator Jacobson, and motions to 1092 from Senator Merman. Finally, an announcement that the Revenue Committee will hold an executive session at noon in room 2022. And priority motion, Senator Bosson would move to recess until 1:30 p.m.
Members, you've heard the motion to recess. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. We are in recess.